Warning, this show may be triggering for anybody experiencing gambling-related harm. Please watch cautiously. We speak from our experiences only. Please seek professional help for a gambling addiction.
Hi, and welcome to the Thanksgiving episode special of the Bet Free Life. I'm Christina, and I haven't placed a bet since March of 2021.
And I'm Brian, and I haven't placed a bet since July of 2014. Christina and I are going to talk about where this show came from because we realized that we haven't done that yet, and also about holiday gambling that we've done in the past, and hopefully we can prevent somebody else from doing in the future, and especially this week, the week of Thanksgiving. But first, Christina, how the hell did this show come together? Why are we doing this show, and what are we hoping for this show?
Okay, I think recapping it and thinking about it, I know that I had you on my podcast. I reached out to you. Well, you reached out to me first.
We should go back further.
Yeah. Okay.
We should go back further because they said, well, a podcast. I started doing a podcast as part of my recovery 7 years ago. When I stopped gambling in 2014, 6 months later, I started a podcast in January of 2015. It's called All In, the Addicted Gamblers podcast. And it was just myself talking to my friend. And that was the simple act of me being able to have therapy. And that's where the podcast started. And since then, it's grown to about 270 episodes. And in doing that, I met Christina. And Christina has her own podcast, and I'll let her explain that.
Yeah, I was actually listening to your podcast that gave me the idea to start my own podcast. I didn't even really listen to podcasts before I stepped into recovery. And I had come across something that said that had named your podcast as something to listen to help. And I thought, okay, I was looking for different methods besides just the standard go to meetings, do the steps. I needed something more. And so I listened to your podcast. I actually went all the way back to your first episode, which is on YouTube. And that's where I first listened to it. It was on YouTube. And I just remember in that episode, you were just being raw and real and talking about, how you were going to use this as your recovery method. And it's been so long now since I listened to the episode, so I can't quote you word for word, but I just remember connecting with that and thinking, man, it'd be great if I could hear a woman talking about this too. And so I kind of searched, and because I was finding a few and far between materials that involved women. And I really was looking for that connection. And so I thought, as my recovery progressed, it just started to build in me that I wanted to be a voice for women who are struggling with problem gambling or affected by gambling harm. And that's what started me on my podcast. And I guess when I put my podcast out there, I had connected with a few other people who were in the podcasting world, Tara, of course. And I was a guest on her podcast. And
Ambitious Addicts is the name.
Ambitious Addicts. Beyond the 12 Steps. And I also connected with Danielle and Tiff, who you had on your podcast. I listened to their episodes, and we all got together and did a roundtable episode. And I remember everybody was giving you a shout out because we were all connected by you in some way. And I had never met you. I'd never talked to you, but of course they had met you. And so I thought, and I remember on that shout, I was like, you don't know me, you haven't met me, but I really appreciate you, And then I think it was not long after that you reached out to me.
Yeah, on my podcast, I'm very aware of I am who I am. I'm a white dude in America, and not everybody's going to want to listen to me. And so I turned over my podcast to Danielle and Tiffany because I met them in a recovery group, in a support group that you and I are both in together, and for gambling addiction. And Danielle and Tiffany were so good together. They complemented each other so well, and they had these different takes than what I did on gambling addiction and recovery. And so I just turned over the podcast to them for, I think, 6 episodes they did, and it's called Gambling Got the Girls. And then I'm so happy to say that they now do the podcast independent of me on their own, and it's still called Gambling Got the Girls, and you can find that in their wonderful advocates for people like us who have been harmed by gambling. And so it was so cool to have that experience, and I miss having them on this podcast, but I'm so glad they're doing it out there. And then I found you on Twitter, just because you had sort of joined that gambling addiction community that exists on Twitter. I'm no longer there. I left for, I'm not a good social media person, so I left for my own mental health. And when I saw that there was somebody else, a lot of the people that we know, Christina, who do podcasts, for the most part, are located over in the overseas in various countries. When I saw that there was somebody else in America doing a podcast about gambling addiction at the time, I was just so tickled and so happy. And so I think I reached out to you and I said, "Hey, hi, welcome. I'm so happy you're doing this." And
yeah, you sent me a Zoom link. You're like, let's chat. And
oh,
I was
that's
like,
right. Yeah.
all right, let's chat. And so I think that just kind of started that. And then we, just kind of acknowledged each other through the community and things that we were doing. And then I reached out and asked you to be a guest, if you'd be interested in being a guest on my podcast. And that kind of started our conversation. And after we got done with the interview, I kind of liked how we went back and forth. I thought that we were both kind of similar in our thoughts and ideas about recovery, gambling addiction, gambling harm industry, and things like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, and you had mentioned that you had wanted to do a YouTube show, and that it had been spinning in your head for a while. And I said, well, so do I. I was going to take the podcast just as a live version of, YouTube. And then I was like, why don't we just do it together?
Yeah. And those are the words that changed everything for the better, because it's been such a thrill to do these, but I don't want to shortchange what we're doing by saying it's been easy, but it's been easy doing it with you. We both complement each other in ways, in the behind the scenes, the editing portions and the graphics. We're both the social media. We're both kind of doing the things that the other one doesn't want to do. And so it works out so well that we're able to come on here, not only talk about gambling addiction, but create and produce a show that we can hopefully get out to the masses to help better understand people like us with a gambling addiction.
Yeah, and reach people that aren't listening to podcasts. Not everybody's a podcaster. I come across people every day that's like, "What's a podcast?" Right. And so, I mean, I find them in the communities and they're like, "What's a podcast?" And it's, having to explain it to them. So having a platform like YouTube is a great way to connect with different diversities, different, just different corners of people who are struggling with gambling addiction. And I like the male-female perspective. So if somebody's watching this, they get a sense of both sides of it. And so, yeah. And I had been setting on the name The Bet Free Life for a little while for a different project. I always knew I wanted to do something that was more inclusive of both male and female, since the Broke Girl Society is female based. And I still want to be, you and I both agree, this is a great platform to talk about women and gambling addiction and things like that.
Yeah.
But I also wanted it to be something that's more inclusive of just kind of like a space for everybody. And so I was like, okay, I got a name. I remember I was kind of toying with you on it. I was like, I got a name, but I don't know if you're going to like it. And I sent it to you and you're like, I love it.
I do love it. I do love it. It's a perfect name, The Bet Free Life. It encapsulates what we want to talk about perfectly. So I'm so glad that you let us use that name and didn't save it for that project you were going to use it for.
Well, I think this pretty much went above and beyond that project in my head. And I have so many ideas that just float around in my head, but this is probably one of the ones that I am most encouraged by and proud of. And I remember I was coming at you. I was like, okay, here's this, and I don't know how much you want to talk about it, but I didn't realize at the time that you were kind of struggling. And I remember kind of your responses were like, oh, wow. Okay. You were quick on that. And yeah. And I didn't know at the time if I would have probably not done that. But I was so stale for so long in my life. I didn't grow as a person when I was stuck in my gambling addiction, that my head is just so full of ways to try and get the message out there, that sometimes somebody told me the other day, they're like, you were just so fast on moving on a project. And I'm like, my biggest fear is not going back to gambling. My biggest fear is being stuck again.
Yeah.
And so
I have that
So
similar fear. I've felt the best I've felt in a very long time just recently. And what you were alluding to was that 7 or 8 weeks ago, I was suicidal. I took I went to the police station with a shotgun in my car, not to take it out. I left it in the car and I went into the police station and I turned it in for mental health reasons. And they sent me to the hospital, in which in turn I stayed for 2 weeks at an inpatient facility. And it was a wonderful week and a half in that facility. I got everything, the attention, everything that I had been missing with my mental health, that I didn't know that I needed, I got in there. And I, there was depression, anxiety, a little bit of mania. But overall, these were not being addressed by me. Other people in my life didn't realize that I was going through what I was going through. And so I made the choice that morning not to take my own life, but to ask someone for help. And it was the greatest thing I did, because I've never felt, I don't want to say I've never felt, this is the best I've felt that I can remember. I just feel good now. I've been okay for since I left the hospital, but it was just this week where I said, I'm good. I feel good. And that's probably in part to getting my mental health needs addressed. I mean, that is why I'm good. But the other reason is I've been able to focus more on the projects that I've wanted to do, like this project. And every Friday when we record, I'm very excited because it feels like an event. It feels like a show. And as a kid, I wanted to be in shows. I wanted to be on stage. And I got to do a little bit of that as an adult when I was in my early 20s. And I've missed that feeling. And so I think treating this like a show, like an event, feels great. And I think that kind of leads into what we hope for this show, which is our hope is that we can get a nice group of people together to help us grow this show, but more importantly, to have an audience to do the show live on Friday nights. And do you want to talk about why Friday nights are important to us?
yeah, Fridays are paydays for a lot of people. I know when I first stepped into recovery, and I'm different. If you watched the episode before this, we talk about this. When it comes to urges, I didn't have strong urges early in my recovery, but paydays were triggering to me just out of compulsion, just out of habit. It wasn't like I was just urging to go spend my paycheck at the casino. It was, for me, it was more about habit and about like kind of the debt looming and those kinds of things. It wasn't that I wanted to go, but that's not the case, I would say, for a majority of people. I think a majority of people, the minute the money hits the bank, they're at the casino. So I think we both talked about Friday nights being a good way to have something where people can watch and maybe help them work through those urges.
Yeah, that, and it's the weekend. A lot of people will go out and gamble on the weekend, but more importantly, for the people in recovery who aren't going out, what do you do? Well, hopefully, if you like what we produce, you'll hang with us on this show. And if you want to be involved with this show, as in you want to come on the show and talk about your own gambling addiction, then send us an email. You can find that in the show notes of this episode. Send us an email and say, I have a gambling addiction. I'd love to come on and tell my story, because this show is only going to survive on the stories of people like us and people like you. And so please feel like you can be involved with it, because we all need, if we can, it's hard early in recovery. So I would suggest, if you're early in recovery, don't reach out and say, I want to tell my story, because you need to take care of you early in recovery. But then you get to a point where it's okay to talk about. And Christina and I have both reached that point where we wanted to talk more about it. So we're able to come on here and I can tell you that things like I was suicidal, and it's okay with me that people know that about me. It doesn't bother me anymore. There's no stigma with me with that. And the same goes for my gambling. I don't mind at all sharing every gambling story I ever had. Now, we don't ever want to trigger anybody with this show. We will tell realistic stories, but we do have a trigger warning at the beginning, because there'll be times where we talk about amounts of money. There'll be times where we talk about gambling specifically. I know that I want to talk about my gambling ritual on an upcoming episode of how my day looked when I would gamble. And so we don't want to trigger anybody. So please, if an episode comes about that you don't feel comfortable watching, don't watch. Just don't watch. But our hope is to do this live on Friday nights in the new year, so that way we can sort of all have something to look forward to together on Friday nights.
Yeah, and to help get us through the weekend, help reinforce, hey, it's going to be a good weekend. We're not going to gamble this weekend. So definitely a good message.
Well, this episode's going up early this week, and the reason is because it is a holiday week. And so Christina and I thought we would talk a little bit about holiday gambling and when we were doing that, because it is a time when, I don't have to go to work today. I'm going to go gamble. Ooh, I got paid a day early because of the holiday. I'm going to go gamble. Everybody's out shopping on Black Friday. I'm going to go gamble.
My family is stressing me out. I'm going to go gamble.
That's a good point.
The house is full of people and I'm not a people person, and I'm going to go gamble. And those are what were my triggers. This is going to be the first holiday season in several years, probably 15 years, I think. Not all 15 years, but for a good part of the holidays, I spent them in the casino. Halloween, Thanksgiving, Black Friday. I even spent Christmas Eve and Christmas Day in the casino. Because of those very, very reasons. Like, I needed to get out of the house. I could tell myself a number of reasons why I needed to get out of the house and why I needed to gamble. But so this is like my first roll into the holidays in recovery. And I tell you what, it has a different vibe, has a different feel.
Were you excited for holidays? Did you normally enjoy holidays though, even while you were gambling? Did you enjoy holidays?
No. I mean, I did to an extent. It was like I faked it, if that made any sense. Because I've always been a holiday person. For some reason, but the last several years, it added so much stress to me because I was gambling away my Christmas money. I was gambling away, the money I needed to buy gifts and things like that. And it was just, and then not only that, but I would be surrounded by these people who loved me, but didn't know me because I was hiding this whole other life, and I had all these stressors in my head, and, I didn't pay the car payments and, all these things in my head. While everybody's being present in the moment, I wasn't. I was present in all the chaos that I had created, the chaos that just followed me everywhere. And so coming into this holiday season, like, everything's just different. It's just different. Like, I even bought a new Christmas tree. So yeah, I'm excited about that because the last 3-4 years I've been using one where the lights didn't work. It's pre-lit, but half the lights were out and I just kept putting new lights on it. And because I didn't want to spend the money on one.
Because you wanted to gamble the money.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or I didn't have the money to spend on one because I did gamble the money.
Yeah.
It just wasn't a priority. And so I had this janky tree. And anybody that knows me, that truly knows me, I love decor. I love to decorate. I'm your typical Southern woman, and so to not do those things, it's just, it just shows how out of character I was, with this addiction.
And what, for people who are watching this for the first time, what kind of gambling were you doing? Where would you be on these holidays?
I'd be at the casino, on the slot machines. Yeah. That's the only kind of gambling I did.
Did you play the video slots or the slots with like the 777?
No, the videos were, well, I played everything.
The
I
ones
played
with
everything.
all the lines.
Those are the ones I liked the best. When you said that, my favorite game just went right in front of my eyes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's not triggering to me. It's not, I don't get triggered very easily. The only thing that triggers me these days is car trouble. I don't know why. Car trouble, I instantly think.
Car trouble, you want to gamble?
Yes. The stress of car trouble. Because
I get you.
As gamblers, and anybody watching this will know, you just you neglect everything around you. When you get to the state of compulsion that I was in, getting your oil changed, tires rotated, those kinds of things. And so even though I have a fairly newer car, I had car trouble, I don't know, a month or so ago. And for some reason, I did think about going to the casino. Like I don't know. And it's like one of those things where it's just an automatic thought. It's not an urge to go, not a compulsion to go. It just pops in my head. And then it just takes me a few minutes to shake it, like, and then I'm good. But yeah, car trouble.
Talking about holiday gambling, I definitely remember gambling over the Thanksgiving weekend because I didn't have to work. I was working a manufacturing job, and so we were off. And I remember going and gambling then. But the one that really gets me is I was 31 and it was New Year's Eve. And I was house sitting at my aunt and uncle's house. And I was alone on New Year's Eve. And I was in the midst of a relapse that started because my dad died suddenly. And I remember I was like, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go. It's New Year's Eve. But then I was like, it's New Year's Eve and I'm alone. Like, what a weird, I'm not within my friends. I'm not at a party. I'm just alone. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to go. And I didn't want to go because I didn't want to be alone at the casino on New Year's Eve. But I didn't care. The draw of making me feel better because I was feeling alone was too great. And so I went, and I remember I lost all my money by 11:30. And I got in the car. I wasn't even there for midnight. And I went there pretty late in the evening. And I remember being in the car, driving home, which already sucks after you've lost all your money. But then the radio, it hit midnight and the new year turned over as I'm driving home already sad from gambling. And that
Broke, alone.
was such a depressing New Year's that I never want to relive. I don't need to party hardy anymore on New Year's. But I definitely don't want to be alone, leaving the casino broke, cold, and headed back to an empty house after losing all the money.
Yeah, I had so many New Year's Eves just like that. Not necessarily the alone part, but just I was alone, but because I gambled by myself. My husband didn't gamble. I had people around me that gambled, and I don't really want to say like the relationship or whatever, but sure. It just turned into like this social hour, and we'd go up there and spend our holiday, after we did the minimum 1 hour eat and run with the family. And it was like, I couldn't wait to get out of there and gamble. And it's funny, my sister said this year, because I wasn't going to be here for Thanksgiving, but I am now. And my sister was like, okay, well, we'll come to your house and do s'mores or whatever, because I have an outdoor fireplace. And she's like, are you going to be okay with that? I'm like, yeah, why? And she's like, well, the last few years when we've been at your house for a holiday, you couldn't wait to get rid of us. Like, you couldn't wait for us to leave. And I remember that. I remember being that person, like, gosh, I wish, can you eat any slower? Like, kind of thing. I just need to get out of here. I need to get away. And a lot of that was a mix of wanting to just get to the casino. But I would say majority of that was just feeling so ashamed of myself and feeling so wrong as a person, surrounded by all these wonderful people who don't have a gambling addiction. And it's just like, so a lot of that was just how I felt about myself. Not that I didn't want to be around my family, not that I didn't love my family. It's just, and I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we talk about what is going on the screen around us as far as the resources that we're trying to let everybody know exist for anybody who is struggling with a gambling addiction or is looking for help? And we'll name some other ones too that won't be on the screen. But first, let's explain what generally we put on the screen, which would be Gamblers Anonymous website and phone number, I believe is on there.
recoveryroadonline.com. And then it's gamblersanonymous.org. They have Zoom meetings. a handful of Zoom meetings that you can go on if you're struggling or having an urge. Gamblers in Recovery, they have meetings 24/7 all over the world. So if you're struggling and need to get into a meeting, that's a great resource. They have a few that are women, and they have a few for different
women's preferred meetings.
Women's preferred, and then they've got a few for like the LGBTQ plus community. So I mean, they've got some that are very helpful for different communities. And then Recovery Road Online is the same way. They have a women's preferred. That's recoveryroadonline.com. They have the women's preferred, and they, I believe, have a meeting every 2 hours from 6 a.m. to about 1:30 a.m. So you can jump on there. Great group of people, and they interact with gamblers in recovery too. So some of their meetings coincide.
Have you been to a Recovery Road online meeting? I have not, so I can't speak for what it is, but it sounds wonderful.
Yeah, I've been on a meeting on pretty much every website.
Okay.
Trying to figure it out.
I was in a physical GA room for 5 years.
I do that too.
I miss those people. I know that sometimes GA can scare you, but don't let it scare you. The program works. You just have to work it. But it can be intimidating. I was intimidated when I first went in, and it's all about the room and the people in the room. It's not GA that's scary. It might be the people in the room, because they make up the GA that you're dealing with. So if you go to one room and you don't quite feel like you fit, try another room. Don't give up on the program, because it does work.
Yeah. And keep trying it, go try it a couple of times. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but try it a couple of different times. Different people show up at different times. And I think the first one is always the most awkward. I remember my first meeting, I went up to the door and it was locked and I couldn't get in. And I just felt so
left.
I felt like it. I was going to walk over to my car, and then somebody else pulled up, and I saw that they had went to a completely different door that was not mentioned. Like, I went to the door that was mentioned online, and it was actually the opposite door. And so, I ended up walking like around the building, trying to figure out how to get into this building. And then as I was walking to my car, this guy pulled up and he went to this other set of doors. And it was like, I was like, okay, we're just going to do it. I'm just such an awkward person anyway, that I just don't do well in social situations. But so going to a GA meeting, if you're an awkward person, is hard. If you're not socially one of those type of people, which is weird, because now that I'm in GA and I am like Mrs. GA. I'm like, hey, how's it going? Hey, here's my phone number. You can find me here, and it's just kind of one of those things. But don't let it intimidate you to not go. It is scary, but they've all had that first meeting.
Yeah. And I was always a meeting after the meeting type of person. I remember going to a diner after all the meetings. I'd be drinking coffee at 10:30 at night and eating pancakes with people who were, I will say, a wee bit older than me. And it was so much fun, because it's not the meeting atmosphere, it's the meeting after the meeting. And so it's a little looser and you get some fun stories.
See, I would love that. We don't have that option here. So,
yeah. Well, even sometimes Christina and I are in a gambling support group that meets through Zoom, and it's wonderful. We meet a lot of people, but even once in a while during that, we do a meeting after the meeting.
Every once in a
while it happens. You got to make it happen, though. You have to force it. You have to say, hey, hang out. Because it's fun. It's fun. The people we meet in recovery become friends. And so it's nice to chat with them about something other than gambling every now and then.
Some of my closest friends I've met in recovery. I lost a lot of my friends that I've had my whole life because of my addiction. And to when I first started meeting people in like the online communities, Facebook is a great place. If you're Facebook or whatever it's called now, Meta or whatever. I don't know. I'm not all up with that
either.
Keep up with the kids, but there's so many communities, problem gambling communities. Just immerse yourself in those. Take what you want, leave the rest. That's the biggest saying when you're dealing with social media. Just take what works for you and leave the rest, because you're going to have so many different personalities. But it's a great resource to connect. because the opposite of addiction is
connection.
Yeah. So connecting is just a great way to help pull us through the holidays. Having those friends who understand, who might be going through the same struggles, and just having somebody that you can connect with to talk about it is a great way to get through the holidays. So do you want to name off some podcasts?
Yeah.
Like if you're driving and need something to listen to?
If you need something to listen to, obviously there's the Broke Girl Society, which is Christina's. There's All in the Addicted Gamblers podcast, which is mine. But it turns out that there are plenty of others, and we might miss some. Oh, and we should say this too before we say the rest of the podcasts. If you are somebody who is in the know and knows of resources that we do not list that you would like to see listed because you think it would help, send us an email. Let us know. We put this together from scratch through our own Googling and through our own resources. So if we're missing something, which is totally possible, please let us know. If we have the wrong phone number, please let us know. That would be very helpful in getting others help.
And we're always looking for ways.
Let's go back and forth. Yeah. See if we can get all these.
Okay.
There is another one in America called the After Gambling podcast by Jamie Salzberg. And he's a very nice person. He's very good at talking about his own addiction, and it's a very personal podcast. So I would recommend that.
Yeah. And if we could travel across the pond to the UK, we've got All Bets Are Off with Ryan and Chris, who are some amazing guys who talk about their own experience. They bring different guests on, and they're big advocates for women in gambling harm too.
Theirs is more of a season podcast. I think they're up to series 4, maybe, of the show. And there's also Kish and Tracy who do the podcast from time to time with them in different capacities. Tracy is an affected other, and so an affected other is somebody affected by the gambling who didn't get to do the gambling. Could be a family member, a friend, a coworker, somebody like that, and that is Tracy. So check out that podcast. It's very good. I will stay where we're at, and I will say the Invisible Addiction podcast with Alex Lewis is excellent. I've been a guest on that. Alex has a way with talking to people, and I just think he's a really solid person that I really admire, and I'm pleased to call him my friend, and I think his podcast is excellent. So check that out.
It absolutely is. Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the U.S. and we're going to talk about Tara Carbert and the
Ambitious Addicts.
Ambitious Addicts Beyond the 12 Steps. She's like one of my closest friends.
She's going to send you a nasty text.
She is. I went blank right there. But yeah, that's an amazing podcast. And she brings in like just the way that she brings in different personalities and different energies and different things like that. It's a great podcast. She also works the steps with me it's on both of our podcasts, and she works them from a codependency aspect, and I work them from a compulsive gambling aspect. And then I'm just going to go ahead and add in Gambling Got the Girls with Tiff and Danielle. They are amazing. They're a great team, and they're both such wonderful women. And it's just so great to have more voices talking about problem gambling in this community.
I will stay in the States and take us to New York, to the Mid-Hudson Problem Gambling Resource Center as part of the New York Council on Problem Gambling, and the Hidden Addiction podcast, which was started by 3 people who work there, Colleen, Amanda, and Leilani. And it's a really wonderful podcast from people who are actually working to help people like ourselves who have the addiction. So they are doing wonderful things with that podcast, The Hidden Addiction.
Okay, and I'm going to go north to Canada, and you've got Fold'em podcast with Adrienne, and she is on the clinical side also, but she brings in people who have been affected by gambling harm. She brings in compulsive gamblers, and just has these great conversations. And so it's great to get a mix of both clinical and that peer recovery support system she's got going on.
Let's just go with the Problem Gambling podcast with Barry and Tony. It's in Ireland, and it's great. I've had the pleasure of having them on my podcast, and wonderful guys to talk to. And Tony's got an amazing story. And he also wrote a book about his addiction. Most of these are going to be people with lived experience with the gambling addiction who are now talking about it.
And it's great. It's great to, erase the stigma of talking about this. We all need to feel comfortable and safe to talk about this addiction and to find the help we need.
Friend Mark, who is also in Ireland, does a podcast, and it's called Recovering. Oh, gosh, he's going to kill me. But he does one. Just you'll find it when you find a grouping of these wherever you get your podcast. You'll find others. I'm sorry, Mark, that I'm forgetting this one, but it's another good one with lived experience. And he just actually went through the whole Smart Recovery book on his podcast. It took him like 15 episodes. Oh, there's the Voices podcast, which is out of Washington State. There is the Evergreen Council. Tana over at the Evergreen Council puts out a podcast as well, which is really cool. She's really good at what she does. So check that out as well. I knew that.
Yeah, and if you put gambling addiction in your podcast search engine, you'll pull up quite a few.
Plenty of resources.
Yeah. So let's talk about some people in social media that are helpful. Like if you just want some inspiration or whatever.
A couple of TikTokers, I think.
There's a couple of great TikTokers. I want to talk about Stacey Goodwin. She's the Girl Gambler. She's big in the UK. She's got TikToks, Twitter, Facebook. She has her own Facebook group, A Safe Place. And she shares so much of her story and so much of her like everyday life in recovery. And she has a book, The Girl Gambler. And it's just, she's an amazing person and what she's doing to help advocate for women in recovery, find recovery. She's an absolutely wonderful human being. I was fortunate enough to be able to have a chat with her on my podcast early on. Like I was brand new and she was like, let's talk about it. So I'm always going to be super grateful to her for that. And then you just had a great interview with a TikToker.
Yeah, on my podcast, I was lucky enough to have Nick, who is at Gambling Guard on all his social media, but the main one that he's on is TikTok. And it's funny to see his personality on TikTok and then talk to him in a long conversation. He's a gem of a human. Really enjoyed the conversation we just did on the podcast. I haven't even released the podcast yet. It'll be out soon. And he does funny bits that teach you lessons about gambling, and he educates and he gives you resources, and he makes it fun to be in recovery. And he's just super talented, and he and Stacey both have a very large following, so check them out.
Yeah, and that's for a reason, because they're both so good at connecting with people. I remember reaching out to him a while back because some of his stuff was just, it was funny, but it was serious at the same time. It was educational. And I just remember sending him a little message saying, hey, your stuff's great. I just want to tell you that. And because I was having a really bad day and I came across one of his TikToks, just randomly came across one of his TikToks. And I've been a fan ever since because it put a smile to my face. It kind of made me realize that, hey, we're going to have some bad days, but there's going to be so many more good days. And so I just wanted to share that in case he watches this. And he was so kind and reached out to me. So, yeah.
We should also give out the NCPG website, which is just ncpg.com, which is the National Council on Problem of Gambling, which is the main national organization of advocacy for, again, helping people with gambling harm. That's listed on our website. And at the end of our videos, the first few videos, you'll see it during them, but we've put them at the end now, are all the phone numbers in the different states that you'll call. And you'll notice some repeats, but that just means that your state uses another state's helpline. That's the case generally with 1-800-GAMBLER and then the National Council number as well. It runs a little fast at the end of the video, but you can just pause it. That's the joy of YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're in a place where you need to figure out some different resources or anything like that, you are always welcome to email us at thebetfreelife@gmail.com. All that information will be up in the show notes. But we're always, happy to share any kind of resources or anything that we've come across in our own recoveries. And we're always looking for any resources that we haven't come across that have helped you. So.
And I should mention about the phone numbers. The reason why you would call a phone number would be that some states will offer you free therapy. For
Yes.
instance, as part of your recovery, if you call them, but you have to call the number and say, oh, I heard maybe that, is there therapy available? Basically, you'll call and say what resources are available, and then they can guide you to different meetings that they know exist in the area. It's very state specific. So you want to, if your state has a phone number, call the state phone number. And if you can't find a phone number for your state, call the national phone number, or 1-800-GAMBLER. Call one of those two bigger phone numbers, and hopefully the person at the other end, I say hopefully because hopefully the person at the other end of the phone will get you to who you need, or at least get you a phone number of a more direct. Don't give up if you have to call twice. It's just not worth it for yourself. And as Christina said, you can email us and we'll do our best to get you to where you need to be. And if you just want a lot of good information, check out both of our podcasts. I know I already said that once, but we've been doing it a while, and there's a lot of information out there that you can find.
We're not affiliated in any way. We're not advertising for anything, but there are gambling specific recovery centers out there too. I've just been asked this so much lately that I thought maybe I would just pop them out there if you're okay. Yeah. Okay. So if you're in Minnesota, it's state funded. It's Vanguard. It's for specifically for gambling recovery. And I like to talk about the ones that are specifically for, there's a lot of great programs out there. I know Oregon has a really great program, but not necessarily gambling specific. But then you're
talking about inpatient. Somebody would
yes,
go
I'm sorry.
And spend
inpatient.
amount of time. Yes.
And I think it's important sometimes to separate them out from the other addictions, even though there's such a similarity or commonality between addictions. Gambling addiction, as a recovering gambler myself, has some specific needs. So whenever you're looking at like therapy and inpatient, outpatient, however you're looking at it, your goal is to try and get to somebody that specializes in gambling recovery. But if you can't find that, because I know that it's not as widespread as we want it to be, definitely focus on addiction recovery when it comes to therapy and those types of things. But you also have CORE in Louisiana. It's a great facility. I've never been to any of these places, but I've talked to a lot of people who've been through these places. And then you've got Algamus in Arizona. So I just want to say those three places are gambling specific recovery only. They're inpatient. If you want any information on their programs, I'm going to let you research that yourself, but I just want you to know that those are available and out there. And if you're in Minnesota and you're a resident of Minnesota, it's free. If you're in Louisiana, resident of Louisiana, it's free. So,
and I think lastly, in the resource section, if you're looking, online gambling is pretty prevalent these days. If you're looking for something to block gambling websites from your devices, we are both big fans of the people over at Gamban. We think they're good people and their lived experience. So that's gambling blocking software, and that's just gamban.com. You can go there. There's an app that you would download for a nominal fee. And actually, if you live in certain states, there are states that will, if you call the helpline, that you might be able to get Gamban for free through them because they have licenses for it to give out. So check that out as well. And if nothing else, if you do nothing else about your gambling addiction and you need help, just tell somebody. Tell a friend, tell a relative, tell a stranger, but tell somebody in person, not online. You need somebody in person so that way they care about you, so that way they can lighten the load that is on your shoulders. And if they don't care about you, make them care about you. Because that is the best way that I have found to recover, is to talk about the addiction, to talk about what's going on in my head, to get that out in the open, because you never know who else is going through that around you.
Absolutely. I remember when I opened up to my oldest sister, I had kept it from her for the longest time. And having that conversation with her really changed things for us, because I found out everything that she'd been going through that I didn't know about. So having this conversation, you can open up a whole line of communication that you didn't think was possible, and it can change your life. So definitely. And last but not least, I want to add to it, journal.
Good
for the people out there, like, get it out of your head. sometimes if you get it out of your head and you brain dump it into a journal and you read, it kind of gives you a different perspective on things. It kind of makes things sometimes make a little more sense. Not all the time. If you look at my journals, not all the time, but that's a good help if you just need to get things out. So
Yeah, I don't know why I started saying this, but I always like the talking helps, but I will say talking helps, but writing heals. And
yeah,
so if you don't
yes,
have someone to talk to, like I back that up 100%, write it down.
yeah, write it out. Yeah, try and find somebody first, but yeah.
Well, Christina, happy Thanksgiving to you and your family, and I hope you have a wonderful one. And happy Thanksgiving to everybody watching in the States, and happy Thursday to everybody else.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess we'll see you after the holiday.
Yeah, our next recorded episode will be on December 3rd, so it'll be out the 4th or the 5th.
We have so many great guests coming up, and we just look forward to you guys joining us.
Thank you for watching The Bet Free Life. Check out Christina's podcast, check out mine, but more importantly, stay safe from gambling. Thank you.
Thanks. Boo, boo, boo.